Hello and welcome everyone on the Information Technology and Service Management PCB webinars. My name is Vilera Shala, the PCB organizer of this webinar, and today's topic is what ISO implementation can learn from Lean Startup and Value Proposition Design. This webinar will be presented by Mr. Orlando Olumide Odejide, who is the Chief Trainer for Training Heights Limited. Orlando is an experienced enterprise architect and program director working on various technology solutions. Please, if you will have any question or comments during the webinar, use the right-hand control panel, or you may use the option to raise your hand, and Mr. Odejide will answer to them accordingly. Please, Mr. Odejide, you may continue with your presentation.
Okay, so it's afternoon where I am, so good afternoon everybody. I hope you can hear me clearly. Once again, my name is Orlando and I will be taking you through this session. It's primarily about two things. I've been working on a couple of initiatives that border around process and quality improvement, especially around ISO implementations. And I've come to learn that there's a lot that you and I, who are especially implementers of various ISO standards, whether it's 20,000, 27, 22301, 9001, any of those, whatever it is that we're doing from an ISO implementation perspective, there's a lot that we can learn from two different methodologies and books, basically. And I have also delved into these two books and into these two approaches, and I've seen how it is that they can help with regards to an ISO implementation. I was speaking to a friend recently, and I said a lot of people consider ISO work to be very uninterested. Some people think it is boring. Some people think it's just, a couple of consultants come, they help you put some documentation together, and then you get another set of consultants who are auditors, and they review you, and literally that's it. But I beg to differ, especially if we take these two approaches that we're talking about, if we take both of them into consideration. I really do believe that ISO implementations are extremely value added to an organization, and I think they can be fun. I think we all need to be able to bring the interesting and the fun parts into the ISO implementations that we're doing. And so we'll be reviewing two separate books, and each of these books are like the guidance document for two approaches. One of them is called the Lean Startup, and the Lean Startup is a great material. A lot of people who especially are involved with small businesses, startup businesses, literally the Bible is the Lean Startup book, and it's got loads of advice and loads of approaches by which an small businesses and small organizations can make sure that their startup is successful. The great thing about it is that even very big organizations have adopted the same methodology. So this is not just about small organizations. So the Coca-Colas, Cadbury's of this world, they're all looking into the Lean Startup because everybody's thinking lean in terms of their business operations. The other one is about value proposition design, which is basically talking about designing value propositions and using the method of visualization. I really do believe you and I as implementers have a tough job to do these days. Budgets are being cut. Different clients are literally scaling back down on their use or sometimes their need for ISO services. In fact, in a lot of places, what's driving ISO is actually the regulator. So you and I have more responsibility now more than ever before to actually make sure that our ISO implementations are more value-adding than they've ever been. So we'll look at these two approaches. And this next slide is directly from from the Lean Startup, and it talks about product validation, market penetration, and market expansion. And if you're going to do an ISO implementation for an organization that is thinking along these lines, you will agree with me that it's a different approach to doing ISO than the way you and I have always done them. So we've got to kind of ensure that what we're looking at within the context of the ISO is in alignment with the roadmap that the client is using to evolve their business. A client that is following these 4 approaches of developing a product, of checking out the market, of then penetrating the market and expanding in the market, well, and we also looking to achieve one ISO standard or the other, brings much more, should I say, demand on the ISO implementer. The implementer has got to think further than he or she has ever thought of to be able to use ISO standard in this type of chaotic type organization. So typically people do ISO standards when they've been in the business for a long time, sometimes 5 years, sometimes 10 years, sometimes even more. When we're talking about using ISO, helping an organization that is just in its year 1 or year 2 of operations to actually adopt an ISO standard and to ensure that ISO is value added to the organization, not just as a regulatory check for the business. So especially from a process perspective, it's very important that we understand how to align our ISO processes to where the business is going. And this kind of model is what businesses are using. So we need to look deeper than we've ever looked into the business in itself. We need to ask ourselves, what exactly is the business about? What are they doing? What are the demands in the environment for the products and services of that organization? I've seen an organization that has achieved ISO, but they still packed out of business. They actually have achieved a couple of ISO standards, and they still closed down the business. That means, a company can be ISO certified, but not have a sustainable business. So you and I have to think much deeper than we've ever thought when we're thinking about ISO for these uncertain times. In a lot of countries, there's a lot of economic downturn. In a lot of countries, especially in some certain countries, and the ISO is still has a place to stand even in those institutions. Okay, so this is an approach that we've got to think about. We've got to think about how companies create their product, how they check whether there is a need or a validated need in the marketplace for their product, how they themselves do their sales and marketing to be able to penetrate into the market. With a certain ISO implementation that we're doing right now, a real consideration within the ISO framework is the use of social media. Because for our organization, everything that's going to do with sales and marketing rests around social media. So there's more thinking that we've ever had to do with regard to helping businesses achieve ISO now. So I apologize that the next few slides are a bit wordy. It's because there's actually a lot that you need to know and that you need to take into consideration when we're looking at lean startup in itself. All right, so a lean startup just says that you should not grow big at the very beginning. If you remember the .com bust, where everybody ran into a challenge was that they put more money into the business than the market was able to take. They also put more money into the business than the majority of the market that the businesses were going to exist inside of. So lean startup literally just says that you really need to be thinking of how to start small, how to leverage the capital that you have, the human resources that you have, and start small so that you can expand and go big as you go on. Okay, so lean is not a new concept. There's been lean manufacturing for years, and this just writes it in a much more modern and intuitive approach that helps organizations take it in than they've ever done before. If you work with any small company, especially technology startups, lean, this document called Lean Startup is literally some kind of Bible for those organizations. Right? Enables the company to shift directions to be agile. So agile is a concept that we're still going to review even within these webinars. Now, how can an ISO implementation be agile? Now, can we bring Scrum and agile methodologies into an ISO implementation? That is a concern. Now, can we do an ISO implementation in such a way that it doesn't go through the normal waterfall methodology? Instead, it goes through the agile approach. And that's what this is talking about. It's talking about bringing agility into how companies are run. As you and I, as ISO implementers, we're also interested in the sustainability of the businesses of our clients. What is the point of an organization achieving ISO and then closing down their business while they are holding on to an ISO certification? So our ISO approaches have also got to think about the sustainability of the businesses that we're working with. Those businesses need to be agile. Those businesses need to be innovative in terms of how they work. Okay, I'll move on quickly. So, as I mentioned before, lean thinking is not a new thing. It's always existed. People have always done lean as it is, and it's about using the least of the resources to be able to achieve the highest of results. How can we do things faster with less resources? How can we do things smarter? Okay, so there are these three concepts. One of them talks about lean thinking, right? The other talks about how we do progress measure, how we can use both qualitative and quantitative approaches to measure how our progress is going to be measured both internally and externally as it is. Then we've got to be able to measure ourselves from a productivity perspective. A lot of organizations are not productive. Right? I've had issues where clients say that, you know what, we've achieved ISO 9001 or we've achieved this other ISO 20000. Nevertheless, we're not lean in our approach. And that's why in IT, people bring up the concept of lean IT as at today. Okay? There's also the concept around build, measure, learn, that entire feedback loop, which is also very synonymous with agile. How do we build our products in small increments? How do we test them in the marketplace? How do we measure the effectiveness of our solutions and products as a business? And how do we take feedback and then build, once again, incremental? So these are very important concepts. The concept of lean thinking, of progress measure, of productivity, and of build, measure, and learn feedback loop. Okay? So let's move on to the next bit, which is around learn. So learn talks about validated learning. How do we ensure that, we're validating our learning? Now we're not just learning, so the learning has gone beyond what it used to be. Now we're thinking to ourselves and we're asking ourselves a question that, is our learning, is it validated? Okay, are we sure that, the things that we're learning are contextual to the business? Within an ISO implementation, how do we ensure that we don't just leave the client with a bunch of documentation, but we're in a position to actually help the business achieve its objective? So learning is a key part. A lot of clients today are worried about organizational learning, not just the learning of the people, but whether the business in itself is learning as an organization. So learning is key. It's key to every business. And we're not just talking about the learning of individuals, but also we're talking about the learning of departments. And ISO implementations are meant to help an organization learn. Learn from the past, learn from other people's experiences, learn from their own experiences, and be in a position to be able to be, should I say, super performers in the marketplace. So there's a lot of learning that we need to take into our operations. And of course, if we're going to learn, that we've got to be actively measuring as it is. So if you look at the first bullet point here, it says your job is to find a synthesis between your vision and what customers would accept. There's a huge problem with businesses as of today. And if ISO implementers are not in a position to advise the business in itself, so I'm working with a client and I'm looking at the profit, I'm looking at the annual report of the client, and it's obvious that this client is going to be in trouble in the next couple of months as it is. Now, if the client is going to be in trouble in the next couple of months, and they literally might not exist any longer, me as an ISO implementer, especially if I'm doing ISOs like 9001 and 20000 and similar type ISOs that really do affect the core of the business, I should be in a position to be able to advise the business. I should be able to advise them categorically with regards to their business. So it's important that a business learns and that we as ISO implementers, we help businesses learn. Once again, you see the concept of lean thinking, thinking about value, thinking about how to reduce waste, thinking about the highest amount of productivity with the least amount of resources. These are uncertain times. In the country where I live, there are issues of currency, of fluctuation, of the valuation of the local currency against the dollar. ISO implementers will be significantly affected if you and I cannot sit with the business and advise them. So I have clients who last year said that, oh, we will do ISO in 2016. And if you go back to them now, they're saying, you know what, we're not making any money. What's the value of ISO to us? Now, these are questions that we've got to answer. Otherwise, there's no point really being an ISO implementer, and these are issues that we've got to deal with. All right? I'll quickly move on to the part that talks about experiments. And experiments are really important, and they're really good, because it makes sense to experiment with products in the marketplace. Even it makes sense to experiment with various market segments. An ISO implementer needs to be able to advise the client on how to do the experimentation in such a way that it does not jeopardize its entire business. We have to learn how, we have to advise our clients and guide them through experimentation that does not put the entire business in jeopardy. So I've seen the 80-20 rule work in the client side, where they've devoted 80% of their time, effort, energy, and budget towards a particular product. And then the product fails. Literally, the company folds up. It doesn't matter how many ISO certifications that they have, the company literally gets in trouble. So we've got to be able to advise our clients in terms of how they can experiment. They can experiment carefully with the way they work, with the products that they deliver, with the markets that they deliver things into. Our ISO implementations in themselves can be agile. It can be incremental for the client. It should not just be how to tick boxes, how to check boxes, and how to ensure that clients can flash around a certificate. So there are things that we need to work with our clients, especially as they're growing. I always tell my clients, I say, companies never run into trouble while they're small. Companies always get into trouble when they're big, when they're trying to grow, when they're trying to expand. As an ISO implementer, we need to be able to guide our clients effectively. We need to be able to help this client. So you see there's a value hypothesis, there's a growth hypothesis. We need to test customer segments, we need to test the waters, and not plunge completely into it. And we as ISO implementers need to be able to advise our clients in this regard. Let me quickly move on. These are some questions that the Lean Startup books talks about. Consumers recognize that they have the problem that you're trying to solve as a business. If there was a solution, will they buy it? Will they buy it from us? What is our unique competitive advantage? So these are questions that I'm having to work with various clients as of today, even as we're trying to sell an ISO service or the other. Can we build a solution for that problem? These are deep-seated questions that sit within the strategy of the client in itself. Now, if we don't address these strategy issues, our ISO implementations are automatically jeopardized. So everybody who is an ISO implementer needs to go back and really look at it and say, if I'm going to increase my market share, if I'm going to be able to work with more clients, how can I work with them strategically? How is it that ISO will not just be a regulatory checkbox that some organizations are worried about? The question to ask is, how can ISO implementation in this organization be strategic and value added? Okay? So look at this feedback loop, and this is great. It's great for an ISO implementer to think about this. Now, how does the client generate ideas? How do they build those ideas? How do they turn them into products? How do they measure this? How do they gather data? How do they learn and build this feedback loop? If you have a question that the client poses to you and says to you, how can you fit your ISO within this, my feedback loop? What is going to be your response? How are we going to respond to a client that wants to feed into this feedback loop, especially with regards to the ISO implementation? There's a lot that you and I as ISO implementers need to learn. If you look at this, it's not just applicable to IT organizations, it is applicable to various organizations. It is applicable to various businesses. You just need to be able to tweak this so that it becomes very value added for a business. Okay? You need to look at it, how do they build their products? Not all products require coding. Some products just require to be built, but how do they measure it in the marketplace using things like Net Promoter Score? I can't go through everything, right? But these are very important concepts that you've got to think about. You've got to think agile. as an ISO implementer. You've got to think lean approach as an ISO implementer. I promise you, if you don't take these things into consideration, ISO implementers are about to see a reduction in market share, especially in countries where the economies are not doing very great. So an ISO implementer really does have much more work to do now than ever before. One of my best concepts in this entire book is the concept of an MVP. And I'll probably really close out on this particular book around what is the minimum viable product. A minimum viable product says that, you know what, we don't spend all your money and time in building a product that the client might end up not wanting. There are too many moving parts. The market demand is moving, the customer demand is moving, the market indices and the factors that guide the market, they are also moving and changing on a daily basis. So we're going to really think about it and say, you know what, can we build a product that is a minimum viable product that is acceptable in the marketplace? And then we can increase it in incremental transition, so to speak. MVP is a brilliant approach. The question to ask once again to yourself, can I do an ISO implementation in incremental approach? Can my ISO be agile? How do I turn ISO implementation into a minimum viable product? So that I can say, you know what, sir, instead of following the waterfall approach of saying, oh, it's going to take you 10 weeks to get this done and we're going to follow through step by step, how can we be agile? How can we deliver something in the first week that is value adding to the business and that counts towards your ISO? While you can achieve the ISO at the end of a 12-month or 16-month or 18-month period. It's important that businesses achieve ISO. It's even more important that the business get the value out of every stage and phase of the ISO implementation. So this is one of my best. I don't want to have to read the entire slide to you, but indeed, you really need to have a look at this. You need to research this. There are tons of resources online that you can find that talks about how do I build a minimum viable product from an ISO in a manufacturing organization, in an advertising organization, in any kind of business. This is the kind of value add that we bring to our own businesses as ISO implementers that we also bring to our client businesses. Okay? I will literally, as I said, let's look at LEAP and we'll look at one of the concepts that we can get out of this. It talks about the startup strategy, right? It's about testing assumptions. But a lot of businesses exist, especially startup businesses, around assumptions. I've seen a lot of people who are also making assumptions about the size of the market for ISO implementation. I've seen new organizations that are going into ISO implementation and they're even making assumptions around the process of helping an organization achieve ISO. ISO today is more than what it was before. It requires experience, it requires expertise, it requires a lot of skill base to be able to help an organization. And ISO more than ever before needs to be value added. Okay? So we've got to look at how you can control variables in the marketplace, variables within the business, variables within the economy. Okay? I'll move on quickly. Alright? There's a concept that I like, it said go and see for yourself. It means that you can't really sit in the back office, sit in a room locked up as an ISO or implementer without getting involved with the business. The auditor can afford not to get overly involved in the business, but the implementer has to be involved. You've got to be knowledgeable about the line of business, about the industry, about what it is that you're trying to consult to the client on. The need for ISO implementers to be really knowledgeable about the businesses and the industries that they're working with is extremely important. I'm seeing a flood in the market by people who say, oh, they're ISO implementers, who have no idea of the business processes and the data elements that are within that particular market. You need to remove yourself from that group and become one of the groups that can indeed thoroughly advise your client with regards to their business strategy, their business objectives, their business processes in themselves, and how they can achieve ISO while their business becomes sustainable into the future. If you go and read the old book called Trusted Advisor, that's what it talks about. How can you and I become a trusted advisor to our client, not just somebody who's come with the heart of ISO? This is the approach that is going to keep you and I in our ISO business for a long time. Testing is key. You've got to test your assumptions, you've got to test your product, you've got to test the market, you've got to test the industry, you've got to even test your approaches. Once again, the concept of minimum viable product is key. You can't put all your money, all your time, and all your effort as a business into one product with an unvalidated market. Okay? So testing is key. I won't read all this to you. You can go into look at it, various kind of testing. Working with the people that we can call early adopters of a solution. You can, when you're doing an ISO implementation, you've got to be thinking about the quick wins within the business. You've got to be thinking about how can this business even demonstrate that a particular unit or a department that has carried out all the dictates of the ISO implementation is in a much better place than other units and departments within the organization. That is a scenario that I've had to experience, where I have to prove that ISO is valuable to the entire business by picking up on one department and ensuring that their processes are adequately documented, measured, and looked at specifically for improvements. Okay? Yeah. Once again, this is just talking about the same thing around how we test our assumptions and how we test the marketplace. All right? Literally, that's it. I mean, it's a great material. This is not a marketing exercise for the book. It's about our business as ISO implementers. You need to look at the book, you need to look at the material, you find tons of resources, as I said, online, and you need to find out and ask yourself, how can I be agile with my ISO implementation? How can I adopt some of the principles that are within this lean startup, both for our businesses as ISO implementers and more importantly, for our clients? How can we go into our clients and become a trusted advisor? All right, I'll quickly move on to the second part, which talks about the value proposition design. This is a follow-up of another material that they already wrote called Business Model Canvas. I want everybody to write that down. It's called the Business Model Canvas. Once again, you'll find a lot of free resources online, and it gives you a model for looking at your business. Right? That is what the Business Model Canvas looks at. And this is like the second installment for it that talks about how do you design a value proposition for your client. This is not, now be careful that this is not just talking about handing over the client a value proposition. It is saying how do you design it. You know what they say that a picture versus 1,000 words. It is very important that value propositions are not just communicated to clients, but they are also designed. They are designed for clarity, they are designed for simplicity, they are designed for understanding and even for agility. So value proposition design is very important. So this is the old material. As I said, as you're on this webinar, you need to open the web browser and look for this. It's available online. The tons of resources around the Business Model Canvas. I promise you, you need to try this out with your client. Learn about the Business Model Canvas. Walk into one of the client sites and tell them that, you know what, can we do the review of your business based on this new Business Model Canvas? And can we align Business Model Canvas to ISO implementation? This is going to open up a broad arena of opportunities for you as an ISO implementer, and it's going to open your eyes to what it is that you haven't thought about as ways by which we can bring in ISO implementation to add value to our clients. All right? So I like this example. This is from Google. This is how Google uses that Business Model Canvas to run their own business. Imagine when you and I are doing an ISO implementation, and the client hands us this business model, that this is how to run their business. Do you know how clear it becomes to us? And imagine if they now have supporting documentation for all the elements that are in here. Their key partners, the key activities within the organization, their resources, the value proposition, their relationships, channels, customer segments, cost structure, and revenue streams. Trust me, if this happens, it makes your life easier as an ISO implementer. More importantly, imagine if you guide your client to achieve this. Number one, this is an extra revenue stream for you as a consultant before you then charge them for doing ISO implementation for them. This is the way, or these are the various ways and approaches by which you and I are going to grow our businesses. And these are very important, right? Now let's go to the value proposition. And it basically just talks about visual representation. That's what it talks about, visual representation. You can look at your product, the client can look at it and say, you know, well, what are the benefits? What experience do we have? What are the features of our product? Then they think about the customer. What are their wants? What are their fears? What are their needs? And what are the substitute products? A lot of these has borrowed concepts from Potter's 5 forces, balanced scorecard. They borrowed concepts from those areas and they brought them into this area. This is very key. If you do this kind of work for your client and you bring this level of visualization into their work, the client starts to see their own business differently. And also implementers can generate revenue from this. We can decide to actually charge the client for delivering this kind of work to our client, apart from our normal ISO work. Further to that, we can then bring our ISO implementation in alignment to this. And that's what the remaining part talks about. Visualization techniques and visualization approaches that we can use within our own business and we can use for our own clients. We can look at what are the products and the services that you offer, what are the gain creators and the pain relievers in terms of what the products and the services offer. And you can then relate that to the customer. These days, everybody is talking about organizational change management. And you can't do change management without clarity with regards to these things. All right? And it's the same explanation. The book goes into a lot of details in terms of how you can do this for various industries, for various segments, how you can help your clients, how you can draw an older model, and how you can come up with a newer model for your clients. On this webinar, we cannot go through the 100% of the details of how this is going to be done, but trust me on this, these are very useful tools that you and I have to look at, and we've got to take things from this into consideration in terms of how we work. Clients, the people who implement this, they use post-its to do it. They do a whiteboard session for 2 days and they charge for it. Some of the companies who do this charge as much as $10,000 to $20,000 for a 2-day workshop to work with the client on ensuring that this gets done. Now, $20,000 is not bad for 2 days work, where the client actually thinks introspectively about their own business and generates those answers. We as ISO implementers can be the people who facilitate such sessions. All right? And you'll find a lot of these resources again online. If you type online, it'll take you to the website, it'll take you to a lot of these resources. It tells you how you can build simple progress boards that you can use to understand progress that is being made, and you can make it visual and do like Kanban boards for your clients. Right? So he also talks about the value proposition canvas, which is different from the initial canvas that we talked about, which is the business model canvas. Now this is looking at it primarily from what is it that the customer stands to gain? What are the pains of the customer? What customer jobs are affected with these new things? Where is the value? Is the value in the product, or is the value in the people who provide these products and services? All right. So what, why? You need to do a lot of design, and you need to be able to observe. So then the book talks about great, the characteristics of great value propositions as it is, and there are loads of characteristics of these great value propositions. I don't want to have to spend too much time. Once again, you will find a lot of this information online. So this is it really. It's about what is it that you and I can learn? What can we take home from this? How can we improve our businesses? Businesses are very challenged, especially consulting companies. There is more requirement for you and I to create value now more than ever before. And we need to utilize some of these new approaches. Visualization, data visualization, business visualization, lean thinking and lean approaches. It's very important that we take all this into consideration so that we can grow our businesses in 2016 and beyond. I think these two approaches are very key and instrumental and vital for how exactly you and I will keep running ahead with our ISO implementation. I plan to keep it short so that we don't spend too much time, but that's it really. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Mr. Odejide, thank you very much for this great presentation. As we have some time left, we'll go through some questions. But first I can see that Mr. Ernest Dunn has raised his hand, so I'm going to unmute his microphone and he can ask his question. Mr. Ernest, can you hear us, please? Mr. Ernest, can you hear us? I guess his microphone is not working, so we'll continue with another questions. Mr. Odejide, the first question for you is one of the attendees has asked you why the lean startup changed everything.
It really does. If you look at it, companies fail every day. In fact, the statistics say that, you know, within a 10-year period, 90% of businesses will fail over a 10-year period. Literally, they will close up. What people have looked at is, why do businesses fail? Alright, remember during the presentation I also said to you, I said no business ever fails while they're small. Businesses fail while they're trying to grow, or they're trying to be big. Lean Startup talks about agile. It talks about you testing your proposition, kind of testing the waters. It talks about, and that's why if you look at the very beginning of this presentation, there was the four, maybe you were not here. If you look at it, it says you've got to validate that the product and the service that you offer, that there's a real market for it. There's a lot of assumption. People do that every day. Even people who are on our side of the business, ISO implementers. As an ISO implementer, you might think that there's a huge market for this. And you might go into it and find out that maybe the market is not as big as you said, as you thought. So Lean Startup changes everything. It talks about you creating the product and not spending all your money and time creating it, but creating it in small incremental versions. So that when you have version 1 of your product or service, you can validate that there is a market. Then you can penetrate the market and you can expand within your chosen market. Just so that you can guarantee profitability. So it really does change everything. And if you look at some of the things that we talked about organizational learning, how an organization needs to learn from its own experiences and from the experiences of others. So I think Lean Startup changes everything. It even changes how you and I look at our own business. I think that answers it.
Thank you very much, Mr. Odejide. And the last question for you is how can Lean Startup help non-tech companies?
Once again, if you look online, there are loads of non-tech companies that are using it. You just need to look carefully into the material and look at how you can take some of their approaches and use it even within a non-technology organization. So if you take, for example, one of the case studies that I read talks about an organization that is into bottled water, you know, like just normal bottled water. And they can look at it and say, is there a market? Then first they have to think about the packaging of the product, because the product is the same. Okay, it's bottled water. Then some other people start to say, you know what, maybe we can make the content flavored. Maybe we can have sparkling bottled water. And that's why you see now that in the marketplace, if you say you want bottled water, they're going to ask you, do you want clear, do you want sparkling, do you want flavored? So you've got to build the product in incremental versions and validate that there is a market. Okay? In doing that, it allows you to think through what it is that you're doing. It doesn't matter whether you're in technology or you're within even advertising space. It doesn't matter at all. There are clear concepts that you can use. Take, for example, the concept around designing a value proposition that fits in with your client, within the wants and the needs of the client and within the organizational structure of the client. That's not technology dependent. That's not for technology companies. That's for all kinds of businesses and all kinds of organizations. I think that's it.
Thank you very much, Mr. Odejide, for this highly informative presentation. I want to thank all attendees as well for joining us this webinar, and we really hope you enjoyed this webinar, and you can check PCB webinar schedule in our website www.pcb.com. Please be informed that next Monday we are hosting another webinar titled Risk Assessment as a Basis for IT Hardening Plan. Thank you very much and bye-bye. See you next Monday.